We should talk about Donald Trump's newest pardons getting a lot of attention because he just issued full and unconditional pardons to two DC police officers convicted in connection to the cover-up of a young black man's death in 2020. Right, so all of this, it goes back to October 23rd, 2020, which notably was 5 months after the killing of George Floyd, which kind of sets the scene for you, and that's when Officer Terrence Sutton and Lieutenant Andrew Zabowski conducted what federal prosecutors described as an unjustified, illegal, and reckless vehicular pursuit. A pursuit where they were chasing 20-year-old Karan Hilton Brown. And according to the prosecution, Sutton and Zabowski, who were driving separate vehicles, saw Hilton Brown riding a moped on a sidewalk without a helmet, with him then reportedly ignoring the officer's attempts to stop him and drove off. And so Sutton chased him from behind while Zabowski drove on parallel streets to try and get ahead of him to cut him off. And so you had Sutton reportedly chasing Hilton Brown for 10 blocks, including at one point by driving the wrong way on a one-way street. He then reportedly pursued Hilton Brown into a narrow alley, turning off his vehicle's emergency lights and sirens and accelerating. And what ended up happening is that when Hilton Brown exited the valley, he was hit by an SUV. And with all that, the video evidence reportedly showed Hilton Brown riding erratically on sidewalks and cutting in front of oncoming traffic. But also, a key thing in this case is that police department policy prohibited officers from chasing a motorist merely because of a traffic violation, right? Including, for example, operating a moped unsafely. But with that, we saw Sutton's attorney claiming they were pursuing Hilton Brown because he had actually been involved in a dispute earlier and they believed that he might have been going to retaliate against someone. But still for many, that didn't explain what reportedly happened next, which, according to the prosecution, was to, quote, bury all this under a rock, with a statement from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia saying, as Mr. Hilton Brown lay unconscious in the street in a pool of his own blood, Sutton and Zabowski agreed to cover up what Sutton had done to prevent any further investigation of the incident. And specifically, the prosecution says that the officers turned off their body cameras and conferred with each other, with Sutton giving the driver of the SUV permission to leave. With then, the officers reportedly failing to notify the department's major crash unit as was required or secure the crash site for evidence collection. And then finally, here, according to the prosecutors, the officers misled their shift commander by describing the crash as relatively minor, downplaying Hilton Brown's injuries and leaving out any mention of a chase. And so what we ended up seeing is Sutton and Zabowski both being convicted on charges of conspiracy and obstructing justice in 2022, and Sutton also being found guilty on second-degree murder. And for all that, they were sentenced to 66 and 48 months in prison. Though, notably, the officers had remained free pending the outcomes of their appeals. And so now, thanks to Donald Trump's pardons, they're not going to be going to jail. And with that, you have the DC Police Department thanking Donald Trump, saying in a statement, the prosecutions were literally unprecedented. Never before in any other jurisdiction in the country has a police officer been charged with second-degree murder for pursuing a suspect. And then adding, the department recognizes the risks involved in vehicle pursuits, which are reflected in our pursuit policy, but violations of that policy should be addressed through training and discipline, not through criminal prosecution. But with all this, you have a number of people questioning if Donald Trump actually had a firm grasp on the details of this case. And that because he's actually been talking about it for a few days, saying things like, they were arrested, put in jail for 5 years because they went after an illegal. They arrested the two officers and put them in jail for going after a criminal, a rough criminal, by the way. And finally, I am the friend of police more than any president who's ever been in this office. Which I will say, there's just like 2 or maybe 3 or actually 4 things we need to talk about. Right? 1, as mentioned, those officers, they were not put in jail for 5 years. They were out on bail pending appeal. 2, Hilton Brown was reportedly just an African-American citizen, not an undocumented immigrant. 3, people have pushed back saying while Hilton Brown may have been breaking the law, according to court records, he didn't have any adult felony cases. Or with a number of people saying the only people actually convicted of crimes here were the police officers being pardoned. And then 4, I mean, as far as Donald Trump being a friend of the police, I feel like that is very complicated. But on one hand, a lot of police officers are actually reportedly outraged about Trump's pardoning of January 6th rioters, with even the Fraternal Order of Police, the largest police union in the United States, which actually endorsed Trump in the election, saying in a statement, allowing those convicted of these crimes to be released early diminishes accountability and devalues the sacrifices made by courageous law enforcement officers and their families. But then, on the other hand, along with pardoning police officers convicted of crimes, it appears that he may be making big changes to the Department of Justice that could undo a lot of the Biden-era efforts of police reform. Or just today, for example, there being a memo saying the department's Civil Rights Division must now notify the DOJ's new chief of staff of any so-called consent decrees, which the division has finalized within the last 90 days. And there you have many saying that this directive suggests that police reform agreements negotiated with cities like Minneapolis and Louisville, they may be in jeopardy. And then secondly, here, Trump's DOJ has reportedly ordered its Civil Rights Division to halt ongoing investigative activity and not pursue new indictments, cases, or settlements. With this freeze, reportedly meant to be, quote, consistent with the department's goal of ensuring that the federal government speaks with one voice in its view of the law. And notably, while the freeze could affect efforts aimed at accountability and law enforcement, the Civil Rights Division deals with a lot more crap than that. I mean, even just in the last week of Biden's presidency, you had them suing an Iowa landlord for sexually harassing tenants, getting sentences for human smugglers and money launderers, and going after states for discriminating against people with physical disabilities. Which is why, among other things, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when this freeze ends. With all that, I do feel like I should note that, according to outlets like the Washington Post, for example, the Civil Rights Division typically experiences the biggest shift in priorities between Republican and Democratic administrations. So, even with that being understood, DOJ officials interviewed since the election reportedly expect the differences to be even more drastic this time around. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.